My son is exceptional. And I'm sure many of you in the audience know exceptional children. But my son is twice exceptional. And I have a psychologist's report to prove it. The problem with exceptional is exceptional doesn't always mean good. When we think of exceptional, we think, yes, amazing. But exceptional just means outside the normal bounds. On the one hand, and it's always when my son, 10 minutes after he should be asleep, starts with a question. Daddy? Yes, Dexter. You know atoms? Yes. You know they're sticky? Yes. Are they the same kind of sticky as sticky tape? Now, I'm not a particle physicist. I'm sure somebody in the room can answer this question really well for a 6-year-old, but it's beyond me. And my Google foo, whilst I would consider it fairly strong, is not necessarily strong enough to answer that question well. And that's awesome. I love it. I get challenged every day. But on the counter side, my son has some challenges. Recently, we went to try a martial arts class, and my son was exceptionally excited. He was raring to go. And the class started. But within 5 minutes of the start of the class, he's curled in a tight ball, smacking his own head in frustration. Why? Because one of his challenges is, whilst he's like a sponge, he absorbs information. You have to be really careful what you say about him, because he'll remember, around him, because he'll remember. He struggles to keep up. He struggles when stuff changes at speed. And you can imagine. That's fine, there's no slides. You can imagine what a martial arts class is like, right? The instructor with a 20-odd 6-year-olds. It's craziness, right? Everybody's running around. They're doing the warm-up. You know, run here, jump, kick, punch, everything. Most kids are having a blast, but not Dexter. And when he struggles, he gets frustrated with himself and shuts down. What is he lacking? The problem is, he has yet to develop the mental tools he needs to deal with the situations that he faces. And we are tool builders, Homo sapiens, probably better known as Homo faber, the tool building ape. Because, especially in IT, we build everything. Now, humanity builds bridges and ships, and everything down to hammers. But in software, we build tools. And like cars and computers, software tools hold a wide gamut. Everything from programming languages, like Scala and MATLAB and Haskell, to data processing tools, like Spark, MATLAB and R, or TensorFlow. Each of these tools makes us exceptional. They're our superpowers. What we can do in one line of code, in a moment, would take a developer from a few years back a week or more to achieve. And what's more important is we build mental tools to deal with the world. We build mental tools to deal with the complexity inherent in building software. We build knowledge You go, you study, you learn. We build strategies, we build approaches. We talk about reactive. We talk about functional. Each of these is a tool in our toolkit to enable us to build bigger and better and greater things. But I think to be a truly exceptional software developer or a data scientist or an engineer in any fashion, you have to go further. Do you ever look at people and think, that person's a great speaker? That person's really good at holding a conversation or explaining what he feels. Or do you look at someone and go, that person couldn't hold a conversation if their life depended on it? We tend to start with an inherent set of tools. The tools in our head that we grew up with. But the tools about people are not, you're not fixed with what you started with. So, at some point, you made a choice. You decided what you wanted to be. For me, I was 6 years old and I decided I wanted to be a fireman. Because a fireman is awesome, right? And then at 8 I learnt about space. And then I wanted to be an astronaut. Clearly astronauts are much better than firemen. But at some point I had a moment when I decided I wanted to do software. What was your moment? How did you imagine it was going to be? When you were thinking about a career in IT and suddenly realized that, it was something that you enjoyed and something you wanted to do. What did you think it was going to be like? Did you think it was going to all be about people? No, I didn't either. When I thought about a career in IT, my vision of what I'd be doing every day was sitting in a darkened room communing with the IT gods. I wouldn't have to deal with all that, people stuff. Am I right? We learn a lot of tools to help us in our day-to-day job, but often we forget about the people stuff and the tools to help us deal with those. We don't operate in isolation. And the interesting thing is listening to the two talks previously, they're great segues into what I'm going to talk about, because when we talk about Watson, it was 14 people for 5 years. When they talked about AlphaGo, it's 25 people for 3 years. Software development and IT is a team sport. And today, I'm going to talk about 3 key groups of people and ways of looking at those groups of people to aid you in your careers. Now, Jamie did a brilliant introduction for my first part. The first group of people are your customers. Now, your customers might be, if you're Tesco's working on the front-end web, might be real people, the general public. If you work in a bank, it might be the trading desk. And for a lot of my career, I don't know whether it's a blessing or a curse, the people who have been my customers have tended to be other developers. I say blessing and a curse, but actually I get quite a kick out of building tools for other people to use. So let me tell you a story. Many moons ago, when I had a lot more hair, and a little less grey, the head trader came up to us right at the end of the day. And he said, "We need this feature. We need it right now. I need it for tomorrow morning, come hell or high water." Now, what would your response be in that situation? Would it be no? Impossible? Now, I've had many requests like this in my career, and most of them, I've got to be honest, are meaningless. I've had managers that believe the best way to get the most out of their team was to drive them impossible demands on a daily basis because, and this is a phrase I took away from one of them, you know that pressure makes diamonds? Is that a great way to run a team? You know, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. It's like, this is not a high school playground, right? This is not bullying. We're supposed to be working together. But what's a better response? Well, the correct response at this point is why. That customer has a need. And the trader explained that there was an opportunity. But there was an opportunity now that would be gone in a week's time. And we thought about it. We discussed it. And one of the things we did is we discussed the risks. If you ever dealt with production systems and you want to deploy tonight, not in 2 weeks, not when your CI builds, but we're going to hot patch production. Who's done that? Anybody? It's not fun, right? Now, there is a real risk that when you do that, you are not just going to break the new feature. You are going to break everything. If I screw up patching the jar on the live production system, there is a chance that at 8 AM tomorrow morning, the system is dead in a way that I can't make it work. The interesting thing was, the trader looked at this, thought about it, and said, do it. So we worked all night. There was pizza and a lot of coffee. And we got it to work. And it was a hack. Don't get me wrong, it was a complete hack. We literally were patching production jars, building them locally and pushing them onto the front of the class path in production. Don't do that. But we added value. The trader was overjoyed. And in fact, we basically downed tools for a week and cleared up the mess we'd created. And the trader was absolutely fine with deferring all the other work we had on the backlog to make things better. My point about dealing with requests and customers is the customer isn't always right, but the customer always has a need. That's why they're there. Your job, and I thought I thought Jamie's point was really valid. It's like, your job is to meet that need, but also, as a developer, as a tool builder, to actually understand and work out what that need is. It's my second group of people. Who here works completely on their own? Never has to talk to anybody else. Right? Nobody. Even when I'm hacking on an open source project at 3 in the morning when I should be asleep, I'm really part of a larger team. And software is a team sport. I come back to what Anthony was saying about Watson and AlphaGo. These are large groups of people working for many years together. So your question shouldn't be, how can I add maximum value? It's, how can I add the maximum value to my team? How can I be an enabler? And one of the challenges in a team of any size is there's only one true constant. The constant is change. You might start with a bunch of functional experts, but in 6 months' time, some of them will move on. And you have new people who might be very great, they might be amazing, but they don't know your code base. They don't know your complexity. They might be junior. This might be their first programming job. But that person has value to add too. They're not dead weight. And I actually start looking back at my own life here. Because have you ever opened a piece of code where you need to make a minor change to a piece of code that you wrote already? And you open it up, and you look at it and you go, I have no clue what this code is doing. I know it gets an input and gives me a result, but I have no clue about what all that logic does in the middle. And I spent entire days effectively rewriting the code from scratch to get back to that point where it's suddenly like, oh, I see what it's doing now. Has anybody else been there? Yeah, quite a few hands in the audience for that one. And I think to myself, it's like, if I had added that one comment to give me, I don't need to explain it all, but that's that observation that made it all clear. Why you would go down that crazy route instead of that nice, pure code. So, when you build code, you've got to build it not just for now, but for the future. I spend more of my day looking at either code I've written or code other people have written than I ever do actually writing new code. And we all do. That means you need to write. Or it is more important to communicate your intentions to your team than it is to communicate your intentions to a computer. Because, yes, the computer interprets it, but they're really fast. For most things, they're so fast that it doesn't matter whether you write it in a nice, clear way that generates tons of garbage, or you write it in a really optimized, really fast, really clever way. And now, I spend a lot of my life writing optimization. And I'm continually fighting that internal battle. In fact, I did something in ScalaSphere. There's a one-line function. Filter. List.filter. And it's beautiful. It's really easy to read. It's really easy to reason about. It's great. It also generates huge amounts of garbage and is incredibly slow and used all over the place by lots of code. So I replaced it with a 30-line, let's be kind, I say a behemoth. It was ugly. Why? Because I need to keep that track of the head of two lists. I need to keep counters. It is not code that I wish to put on a slide. I like those one-line examples. They're great for slides. 30-odd lines of code that don't quite fit on a slide and are really clever. And sometimes you need to make those choices. But what you find if you go and look in the code base is also a big paragraph at the top explaining why in heck's name I'd make that choice. And do I ever forgive myself? Really, honestly, I feel guilty writing code like that. But I look at it and I look at the trade-offs, and sometimes those trade-offs are worth it. So it all comes down to communication. And functional programming is great. And I'm sure many of you in the room will think functional programming is the answer to all problems. And I agree with you for the most part. But the challenge you have is when you write really clever code with applicatives, whatever a new functional term that I don't even know, to make your code tight and beautiful and correct. I'm all for that. But you need to be able to communicate that with your entire team. Not just the type astronauts, but with your new junior developer. Because otherwise, when things break, it ends up being you that has to fix it all of the time. And that's not a sustainable model. As I say, it's a team sport. So how do we fix this? And I had a really interesting discussion last week with Zainab, who's part of the London Scala user group. And she uses a lot of functional concepts in the code that they write in her company. But she has a policy. As a senior developer, she has a policy. When they introduce a new concept, she might write the initial code, but then she is banned from touching it. She is banned from touching that code for a long time. If the code needs to be changed, as all code does, She will code review the answer. She will pair with the person doing it. But she will never touch the keyboard. What does that do? It disseminates the knowledge. It brings all of your team up, not just the superstars. And I think that's a wonderful idea. Having a mixture of experience and knowledge on your team is critical. Be prepared to be questioned. Be prepared to defend your own decisions, but be open and frank with the decisions you make. The last group of people I want to talk about, or in fact, the last individual, is you. Because we're human beings. We're fallible. I know I'm fallible. And we tend to get stuck in certain mental models. Now, the thing I know I do, and I know many developers I know do, and in fact, I can pretty much say anybody I know does this. We like shiny things, right? We like the new and shiny and exciting. So whenever we see a new technology, we get excited. Whether it be, for a few years back, object-oriented programming, or Scala, right? Scala is the answer to all programming problems, right? It's great, I can do functional, I can do object-oriented, I can do everything. I was there. You should have seen me, bright-eyed, young, everything. And then Akka. My God, actors. The solution to all the things. The danger with getting overexcited about anything is you ignore the sharp edges. Or you might not even be aware of the sharp edges. So at one of the companies I worked at, we introduced Akka, and it was awesome. It worked wonderfully. Do not get me wrong, I love the mental model of programming in actors. But we had two systems communicating with each other, and we used Akka remoting. And it worked beautifully, it was fast, it was great. Now, for anybody who's used Akka remoting across two systems, and I'm sure there's probably a couple in the room, your head's probably fallen at this point, because Akka remoting, as it was, has a minor challenge, which is when you upgrade the version of Akka, it's binary incompatible at the protocol layer. So suddenly I had two large production systems that had to be upgraded in lockstep. And trust me, you don't want to have to do that. It's not as much fun as it sounds, and it doesn't sound like a lot of fun. But the counterpoint is, and the danger is, you go the other way. You go, we didn't invent this, the not invented here syndrome. Right? I accept that it is a lot of fun to start with that blank page, that blank project, and build something new. Right? It's cool. It's fun. And for the first week, you're going to sit in the corner with a big grin on your face, coding away. But I promise, if you rebuild Akka, at some point, you're going to come across the reason that that thing that you went, oh, that's a bit weird. Why'd they do it that way? Because you're going to have written it the other way, and it's going to be great for the first few days. And then suddenly, it's going to be a world of pain. Now, has anybody here worked in an organization that's written their own logging system? Yeah? It's exactly that kind of pain, right? At some point, you're like, but 30% of my CPU is creating log messages because we decided we could do better than log4j or SLF4j or whatever. But the people that have come before you have often faced the problems you face. And I found a really interesting analogy. There's a guy called Doug, I think it's Doug Tangren, who is a Rust developer. And he said, when you start a new project, he said, the first thing you should do is have a brilliant idea, as we all do, right? We've all had those brilliant ideas. Stop! Don't build it. First, go and find an open source project that does what you're already wanting to do. And there will be one. So check it out. Look at it. Read the documentation. Oh, there isn't any documentation. Right? Play with it. Go and write a bit of documentation. And if there is documentation and you go, yes, but the documentation doesn't tell me how to build it. Right? One of the things I think is amazing about ScalaSphere is they focus on making it easy to people to contribute. So they will have a contributing.md file, and it will tell you how to check out and build the software. And that makes that low cost of entry. And then, if it's broke, fix it. But you should be, rather than starting again, you should have your default to using what's already there, taking it, improving it, making it better. And only if all else fails, start another project. Because, quite frankly, whilst you might have a great idea about JSON, we don't need another JSON library. I'm sorry, just don't reinvent the wheel. And if you find a wheel that doesn't quite work, make it better. And this applies to your work life as well, your work to-do list. I've got a work to-do list. And normally there's some fun, really exciting items on it, and there's some really boring items on it. And it's very easy to get rabbit-holed into those shiny items, right? It's very easy to spend your entire day hacking on the thing that adds no real value to the project, but is fun. I don't know how much of my career I spent doing that, but it's probably more than I should admit. So how can you be an exceptional individual contributor? The answer is to be aware of your mental biases, to be aware of how your mind works, and when you make a choice, how those choices affect what you're doing. And my basic advice on actually life in general is everything you touch, you should leave better than you found it. You know, even in a tiny way. Adding that one line of documentation that tells me how to build a dead project into a live project can be more valuable than starting again and starting with a new project and forgetting to add my contributing file, and it only builds on my laptop, because that's what happens when you start a new project. So in conclusion, what I want you to think about is changing your perception of different things, whether it's a customer, whether it's how you approach your team, whether it's how you approach your workday or your projects, has a fundamental change on how successful you'll be in those spheres. It's all about people. When we talk about data science, when Anthony was talking, what I was hearing was, you need to understand the customer's problem. Your goal is to add value. And then Jamie was talking, and you need to understand the problem. You need to work out, not to be an individual superstar, but how to have a melange of people in your team that all add different perspectives and different values. And you need to be aware of your cognitive biases. So it comes down to 3 basic tenets. Firstly, regularly ask if you're doing the right thing. Not just for you, but for your clients and for your team. Secondly, add value every day, even if it's just pushing the boundary forward a tiny little bit. Because those annoying things that... No, there are no slides. It's just me talking, I'm afraid. Yeah, these are my notes. So, add value every day, even if it's just a tiny little bit. And beware of those mental biases. Especially our attachment to shiny things. So what about Dexter? Well, Dexter hasn't solved all his problems yet. He's still learning those tools. And if he's like me, it'll probably take a while to learn some of the key ones. But by learning those tools and paying attention not just to the software tools and the tools we use, but the tools in your own mind, you can enhance your career and your life. Thank you very much.